You know I had to cover this story. They're gingers. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Crue Trime. Crue Trime. Crue Trime. Crue Trime. Crue Trime. My name is Sarah, and what I do here is tell you a terrible story to ruin your day and put on my makeup at the same time. So if that sounds like fun to you, you're in the right place. So make sure you subscribe to this channel. So make sure you subscribe to this channel, hit the bell notification, and then that way you'll never miss one of my terrible stories. Y'all. So the entire nation has been gripped by the Murdaugh murder trial, right? As I'm sitting here today, Alexander Murdaugh has been found guilty of murdering his wife and son, and he's been sentenced to life in prison. How did he get there? How did a South Carolina family dynasty end up circling the drain? In today's video, what I want to do is kind of go beyond the headlines and fill you into the rest of the story because it's way crazier than you think it is. This is the story of Alec Murdaugh. So, this is a long one, y'all. And I'm not even really going to talk about the murder. The first iteration of the notes for this was like 19 pages long. Anyway, so what I really want to do today is kind of dig in to the backstory and some other things that came up in the trial, but didn't really go into detail. So let's get to it. In the low country region of South Carolina, in the small town of Hampton, the name Murdaugh stood for law and justice. The Murdaugh men had served as the 14th Circuit District Solicitor from 1920 to 2006. A solicitor is like the same thing as a district attorney. The difference is that a solicitor's responsibilities typically reach into more than one county, and their job is to oversee, the prosecution of criminal cases. Lawyers. Did I say that? Is that clear? I'll try to timestamp this or maybe do chapters because it's long and there's quite a lot. So let's just start at the beginning. Randolph Murdaugh Sr. He was born in Varnville, South Carolina, the youngest son of a wealthy local businessman. He graduated from the University of South Carolina Law School, and then he went on to found his very own law firm. So this law firm, you've probably heard a lot in the trials, PMPED. Those are the names of the partners, but over the years, that name changed a lot. It started off as just the Murdaugh firm. Well, as I mentioned, the name of the law firm changed many times over the years as partners kind of came and went. So eventually, in 1920, Randolph Sr. was elected to be the solicitor of the 14th Judicial Circuit that oversees Allendale, Colleton, Hampton, Jasper, and Beaufort counties. Now, I keep messing this up because I grew up in North Carolina and there's Beaufort, North Carolina. It's spelled the same, said differently. Beaufort versus Beaufort is Beaufort in South Carolina. Got a long story. Might as well do a very elaborate face today. Anyway, so Randolph Sr. was married and they had one son that they named Randolph Jr. They called him Buster. Buster would grow up and go to law school and join the family firm, get married. They also had a son, and they named the son, guess what? Randolph Murdaugh III. They called him Randy. Okay, so there's 3 Randolphs now. In 1940, the then 67-year-old Randolph Sr., Randolph number 1, died in a car accident when his vehicle collided with a freight train. His position of solicitor was essentially inherited by Buster. He was appointed to the position when Randolph Sr. died. He was later formally re-elected back to the train crash. So historians have wondered if the death might have been alcohol-related or maybe even a suicide, but nothing has been proven. Investigative reports from the Washington Post and the Hampton County Guardian revealed that according to the driver of the train, Randolph Sr. actually waved to the conductor of the train as it was speeding toward him. When his body was later recovered, it was found about 150 feet away from the railroad crossing, and the death was ruled an accident. At any rate, Buster actually sued the railway company, Charleston and Western Carolina Railway. He argued that poor rail crossing maintenance contributed to his father's death, and the railway company settled out of court with the Murdaughs in 1941, paying $100,000, the equivalent of $2 million in to-date money. This case would actually be the Murdaughs' first foray into civil litigation, and they found that they were really good at it. Okay, so Buster Murdaugh number 2 served as the solicitor from 1940 to 1986. So he was known for courtroom theatrics. You know, he knew how to put on a good show for the jury.
Jordan fades back, swoosh, and that's the game!
His closing arguments were actually known to be super fiery, so much so that he was rebuked several times by the state Supreme Court. Scandal number 2 for the Murdaughs. In 1956, Buster was indicted by a federal grand jury for allegedly warning a bootlegger to move his moonshine still. This was, of course, to avoid detection because moonshine stills, not legal. Anyways, he was eventually acquitted of that charge. When Buster retired in 1986, his only son, Randolph III, aka Randy, took over the office. And he, of course, had gone to the University of South Carolina to become a lawyer as well. So the University of South Carolina, or if you're in South Carolina, they just call it Carolina. That's like the Murdaugh Legacy School. So I clarify that it's called Carolina in South Carolina because in North Carolina, Carolina is considered University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Okay, so Randy has taken over as solicitor. They just seem to like pass it down, from one to the next. But remember, it's an elected position, and Randy did eventually run unopposed every election, in fact, and he kept the position until he retired in 2006. This is where it starts to become a little bit more current, so stay with me. So Randolph Murdaugh III, Randy, married Elizabeth Alexander. She goes by Libby. They had 4 children, a daughter named Lynn, and 3 sons. Randolph IV, he also goes by Randy, Richard Alexander, who goes by Alec, and John Marvin. And if you followed the murder trial, you recognize all these names. Well, Lynn and John Marvin decided to kind of go their own way. They weren't interested in the family business. But Randy and Alec both studied law at the University of South Carolina, and they eventually joined the family firm. Randy number 3 was eventually nicknamed Handsome by the grandchildren, and then eventually everybody else started calling him Handsome, so that's what I'm going to call him to keep things straight. By the way, that's adorable. To call your grandpa Handsome? Cute. Anyways, so Handsome was a legendary presence in the Low Country. Not only was he a Murdaugh of the Murdaughs, he was the partner in one of the largest law firms in South Carolina, and he was actually an excellent attorney by all accounts. He did retire as solicitor in 2006, and he returned to private practice to work with his 2 sons, Randy and Alec. In 2018, he was awarded the Order of the Palmetto, which is like the highest civilian honor awarded by the governor of South Carolina, and it's given to people who demonstrate extraordinary lifetime achievement. The point is, that's a really big deal, and that just speaks to the big deal that the Murdaugh family was considered in the area. So you get it. It's a huge legacy, and the courthouse in Hampton had portraits of 3 generations of Murdaugh men hanging in the courtroom. With that background out of the way, let's talk about Alec. Richard Alexander Murdaugh was born on May 27th, 1968. He attended University of South Carolina, and he graduated from law school in 1994. While he was at Carolina, he met Margaret Maggie Kennedy Bransetter, and they married just right before he graduated from law school. They had 2 sons, Richard Alexander Jr., who they call Buster, and Paul Terry. So over the years, it seemed like Alec's law career was pretty successful. He joined the family firm after college, as I said, and under his father's direction, became a volunteer part-time solicitor, which he said he did so that he could work a little bit closer with his dad, His specialty was actually personal injury law, plaintiff's cases where there's a lot of money. There's a lot of money in that because the settlements that are awarded in those cases are typically quite large. And, the attorneys take their cut right off the top. Alec Murdaugh was born to be a lawyer, literally, and for almost a century, his family controlled justice in that district. Over the years, Alec won a lot of money for a lot of people, but a very interesting report from the Daily Beast says that his former law colleagues didn't think he was that great. I mean, sure, hindsight is 20/20, especially knowing now everything, you know, they all said that he wasn't some legal scholar. He wasn't especially gifted. He was pretty sloppy, actually, but he was a really good bullshitter, master manipulator. He had the gift of gab, you know? I wish I had it. I don't. I'm so awkward. By the way, yes, his name is Alexander Murdaugh, and it's spelled Alex, A-L-E-X, but they all pronounce it Alec. Alec, which is, I guess, the more traditional, like, Scottish pronunciation. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anyways, well, Alec and Maggie, Mags, they lived a great life. They were rich. They had beautiful homes, plural, homes. They took elaborate vacations. They had really nice cars, you know, all of it. They employed lots of domestic staff over the years, you know, assistants, groundskeepers, housekeepers, nannies, you name it. And these people were loyal. I mean, they probably had to sign non-disclosure agreements, but anyway. What we do know is that the Murdaugh boys, Paul and Buster, they didn't want for anything. They were really into sports and like outdoorsy things, hunting, fishing, and all that stuff. They were boys, you know. And as they got older, they had a lot of independence and a lot of resources. Cars, boats, guns, money, anything that they could ever want. Also, Alec and Maggie treated Paul and Buster's friends like their own kids. They were always around, sometimes living at their properties. They were very embedded in the family. You get it. Back to Alec and his personal injury law practice that was making him like mountains of money, like Scrooge McDuck diving into the coins. Amounts of money. Anyways, we now know that Alec did a lot of shady things with his clients' accounts. And there's something like 99 financial crimes pending. The trail of mismanagement and, you know, straight up theft is so long. We would be here for a week if I tried to go into each of the cases. I'm not going to get too far in the weeds, but I am going to like sum up just a couple of like egregious examples, like very simplified. Number one, in 2005, Elena Spahn and Hannah Plyler were just young girls aged 8 and 12 when they lost their mother and brother in a car accident. The girls were actually in the car accident too. Alec represented the girls in a lawsuit, and his homeboy and the Palmetto State Bank CEO, Russell Lafitte, which sounds like a cartoon character name, he served as their conservator. So not only did Russell and Alec pay themselves handsomely from this settlement, Alec took loans from the girls' accounts without their knowledge or permission. Alec and Russell were like fully laundering money through these girls' accounts for years before the girls turned 18. And it's funny, old Russell Lafitte just sort of like backed away slowly. Homer Simpsoned himself into the bush when the girls turned 18, so nobody would catch on. If you're curious, he got busted. Big time. Number two, in August of 2009, 19-year-old Hakeem Pinckney was in a terrible car accident that left him a quadriplegic and on a ventilator in a nursing home. Alec Murdaugh represented him in a lawsuit against the maker of the tires that failed on the car, causing the accident. The aim was to get money to help care for his medical needs, you know? He was gonna be in like full-time care for the rest of his life. Well, Alec settled the case for an undisclosed amount, bamboozled Pinckney's mother into appointing a financial conservator for her son's estate. There was some illegal annuity gymnastics, and long story short, essentially stole the entire settlement. 21-year-old Hakeem Pinckney died 4 days after the case was settled when his ventilator became unplugged. Remember, these are very, very simplified, shortened versions of these stories that went on for years, and these families are still suffering. This sort of like money shell game was going on for years, you know, fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, embezzlement, computer crimes, forgery, insurance fraud, and on and on and on.
This is a spreadsheet referencing each client and the amount that was stolen from each client. $225,073.46, $112,500 $338,056.14.
According to the South Carolina Attorney General's office, Alec Murdaugh stole almost like $10 million over the years. And there are upwards of like 50 people that he did this to. The thing is, he was doing it right under the noses of the banks, the law partners, the law enforcement colleagues, or, were they helping him? While the older Murdaugh men may have been upstanding citizens who followed the law because they took an oath, silly oath, Alec seemed to be more concerned with the power and prestige that was associated with it over, actually serving the community. And remember, this family is so embedded in the courts, everybody knows their name, and it's the good old boys club, like 1,000,000,000%. Well-connected lawbreakers who hire amenable lawmakers to represent them in front of hand-picked judges. Alec, more than any other Murdaugh, was so entitled. He thought he was untouchable. And you know what? During those years, he was. And as Buster and Paul got older, they were acutely aware of their last name and who their daddy was and who their granddaddy was. On July 8th, 2015 at 4 a.m., 19-year-old Stephen Smith was found dead in the middle of Sandy Run Road in Hampton County, South Carolina. The young man had severe trauma to his head, but no other signs of having been struck by a vehicle. Like, for instance, there wasn't any glass in the road, there was no skid marks, there wasn't any car parts nearby, there was no blood in the road except for the area like right around his head. Stephen only had scrapes on his knuckles and one arm. The only real injury was to his head. He didn't have any road rash, nothing that you would expect. It didn't look like he had been thrown or rolled in the street. His cell phone was still in his pocket. He was wearing shoes, right? And they were loose, but they were still on his feet. And typically when a person gets hit by a car, you literally get knocked out of your shoes. I've actually seen a person get hit by a car before. It's terrible. Yeah, she came right out of her shoes. Awful. So Stephen's yellow 2013 Chevy Aveo was found approximately 3 miles from where his body was found. The gas tank cover was open and the little gas cap was like dangling, like hanging on the side of the car. I mean, had he run out of gas and maybe was walking down the road during the night to go get some? When they looked in his car, his wallet was in the car. The direction it appeared that he was facing was like the opposite way of the nearest gas station. Also, when they checked the car, gas. So, very suspicious. Like this makeup. I'm just over here giving myself jaundice. Don't worry about it. It's gonna come together. Okay, so investigators were squinting. None of this stuff was adding up. I mean, they were certain that a murder investigation would be opened, but the coroner ruled that Stephen's death was an accident because Stephen was found in the road. What? Apparently, the coroner in this case was a real piece of shit. Argumentative, defensive, and despite multiple investigators seeking further investigation and providing additional evidence and analysis, they just got shut down. Stephen Smith was a local boy. He'd graduated from Wade Hampton High School, actually in the same graduating class as Buster. He was attending Orangeburg Calhoun Tech, studying to become a nurse. Stephen had a huge personality, a jokester, confident, unapologetically himself. He was openly gay, which is, a lot to be said about that in the rural South. In fact, he actually encouraged other LGBTQ plus youth to live their lives out loud. In the weeks leading up to his murder, his sister Stephanie said that he started to get weirdly secretive, which was unusual for him. He told her that he had been dating a prominent guy from the area, and if he told anyone who it was, they would be shocked. The research does indicate that Stephen had a boyfriend at the time of his death, and that boyfriend was cleared. They had a solid alibi. But who was this prominent guy that he was seeing on the side? We don't know. When investigators started asking questions, they got a lot of rumors and a lot of repeat rumors, like the same one. A name kept coming up. Murdaugh. Had this Stephen Smith been on the down low with Buster Murdaugh? His former classmate? Well, the night of Stephen's murder, let's just call it what it is. Buster had been out of town at a softball tournament, and he rode back with some friends, so he would have been driving in the area during the time of the murder. So there's a few theories. One was that Buster and his friends had been driving along and saw Stephen walking and decided to mess with them. Did they maybe hold a bat out of the window and hit his head as they drove by? God, that's terrible. Or had they actually pulled over and picked him up and then beat the shit out of him and tossed him out the back of the truck? The Murdaugh name was mentioned some 40 times in this investigation. And, Buster was a known associate and sometimes friend of Stephen Smith. Coincidentally, Alec's brother Randy was actually representing Stephen's father on a workers' compensation lawsuit, and when he learned about Stephen's death, offered to represent the family should they ever track down who was the alleged driver who might have allegedly struck him. In fact, Stephen's mother, Sandy, actually drove by the crime scene later that afternoon, and she said that she saw both Alec and Randy there. Unfortunately, about a year later, Stephen's case pretty much went cold, but it was reopened after the double murders at Moselle. But we'll get to that. On February 26th, 2018, the Murdaughs' longtime nanny and housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, suffered a slip and fall at the Murdaughs' home. When you listen to the 911 call, Maggie sounds like straight up irritated about it.
My housekeeper has fallen and her head is bleeding. I cannot get her up.
Okay, is she on the ground or is she up near the top?
She's on the ground. She's on the ground.
Is she conscious?
No, not really.
She eventually, during the call, hands the phone off to Paul. He's like even worse, like annoyed.
Knowing if she's conscious is one of the things that the medic needs to know if she's responding at all to you.
I mean, the 911 operator is trying to ask questions to get information to pass along to the ambulance so they know what they're walking into. And they're just like, listen.
Okay, do you know if she's ever had a stroke or anything before?
Man, can you stop asking her this question?
I already have them on the way. Me asking questions does not slow them down in any way.
So they said that Gloria tripped and fell down the 8 brick steps at the front of the house. She was bleeding from the head and was pretty much unresponsive. So the property at Moselle Road in Islandton, South Carolina, it's like one of those little in-between towns, like right outside of Hampton. This was the Murdaughs' 1,800-acre hunting lodge. They had previously lived in Hampton, but the house suffered some damage from a hurricane that had come through, so they eventually were living at Moselle full-time and spent much of their time during the summers at their beach house in Edisto. 57-year-old Gloria Satterfield had been working as the Murdaughs' housekeeper and nanny for like 20 years and essentially raised Buster and Paul. She was a widow and a single mom to 2 young boys herself, and she worked really hard, to take care of them and take care of the Murdaughs. When the ambulance came, Gloria was taken to Trident Medical Center where she was in the ICU, and she had a massive head injury to the top of her head and some broken ribs. The Satterfield family say that Alec never came to the hospital to check on Gloria, and Maggie only came one time. This was a woman who was in their house every day, cooking and cleaning for them, helping to raise their children, and they didn't show up. Gloria never regained consciousness, and she eventually died. At the funeral, Alec actually approached Gloria's, by that time, teenage sons. Their names are Tony and Brian, and Alec said something like he was going to take care of them, and he's going to sue himself. The accident happened off his property, he's got insurance, blah, blah, blah. So Alec introduced them to a friend of him, his homeboy Corey Fleming. Corey appointed a fiduciary, Chad Westingdorf, who was the vice president of Palmetto State Bank. Palmetto State Bank, you say? Well, I'll spare you all of the particulars, like the super in-depth details about money laundering. But what they did was essentially get those Satterfield boys to sign over that insurance settlement to a fake bank account. And then Alec and his crooked friends walked off with the rest of the money. 4 million doll hairs worth. Okay, so to recap so far, we know that Alec has been playing financial fuck games for like at least 10 years, and at this point, no real consequences. So the prestige of his last name and his volunteer part-time solicitor status gave him and his family free passes to do whatever they wanted. But we're just getting started. I know. It's so much. There's so much. On February 23rd, is this the same day? Exactly a year later? About a year later. Actually, almost to the day a year later. February 23rd, 2019. 19-year-old Paul and his friends decided to head out to an oyster roast on Kokie Island. It's about 40 miles away from where they lived in Hampton. So the crew that night was Paul, his ex-girlfriend, 20-year-old Morgan Doty, Paul's friend, 20-year-old Anthony Cook, his girlfriend, 19-year-old Mallory Beach, Anthony's cousin, 18-year-old Connor Cook, and his 19-year-old girlfriend, Miley Altman. So this group of teenagers essentially grew up together. It's a small town. They're all going to the same school pretty much. And, they partied together a lot. And remember, Paul and Buster's friends were treated like family in the Murdaugh house. So they'd all partied with the Murdaughs over the years, including Alec. Look at this. Look at this picture. It's an adult man. Very young girl. So these kids, who at this point are underage, by the way, they drank so often, and Paul drank a lot, like a lot. They even had like a nickname for him, like an alter ego that they called Timmy. Anyways, so Paul decided he was going to drive them to this oyster roast using their boat. They were going to go by boat. They arrived at this oyster roast. It took them forever to get there because they were arriving by boat. They get there, they're having fun, they're partying, la. They're all drinking, of course, Paul especially. He had actually stopped and bought alcohol using Buster's ID. Well, at the end of the night, when they were ready to head home, Paul wanted to keep the party going. He wanted shots. Sometime in the late hours, Paul pulled the boat up to Chambers Waterfront Park in downtown Beaufort, not Beaufort, and the gang headed inside Luther's for a nightcap. Not the entire gang. Paul and Connor went inside the bar to drink, and the others just waited outside near a playground. I almost said playpen. Okay, so when they were done there and they were ready to get back underway, the kids all asked if anyone else could drive, because Paul was full Timmy mode, drunker than Cooter Brown. He was belligerent and combative and just being ridiculous. Nobody's gonna drive my fucking boat, blah 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 blah, swerving all over the place, doing donuts in the water. They were getting scared. It was bad. They kept trying to distract him, get somebody else at the helm, and Paul would just keep coming back to it. It was just not a good scene. So they're driving along, and as they approached the bridge at Archer's Creek, the boat hit a piling, throwing several of them into the water. Connor had been thrown to the front of the boat, and he fell and hit his face, and he broke his jaw. Morgan had pretty severe injuries to her left hand from when the boat hit the piling. I think her hand got smashed. And Mallory was gone. So very shortly after the kids got to the hospital, both Alec and Handsome showed up and started doing damage control. By the way, back at the scene, when everybody else was concerned about finding Mallory, Paul was really concerned about calling his dad. Bail him out. Well, Paul's blood alcohol level was 0.24, which is 3 times over the legal limit. Alec was going room to room, not to check on any of the kids, but to get everybody's story straight. You don't remember who was driving the boat, and it definitely wasn't Paul, right? Gross. It was almost a week before Mallory Beach's body was finally found nearly 5 miles from the crash site. 2 months later, on May 6th, 2019, Paul was charged with boating while intoxicated causing death and 2 counts of boating while intoxicated causing great bodily harm. Was he arrested? Was he booked? Did he spend a minute in jail? No. Did he go right back out to bars doing whatever he wanted? Yes. Well, the Beach family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Murdaughs, represented by attorney Mark Tinsley. While they were trying to negotiate a settlement, Alec's lawyer made an offer from some insurance coverage of like $500,000, and Mark said, that ain't enough, okay? Alec is a very prominent and wealthy citizen of Hampton, but according to Alec, he was broke.
Sure, Jan.
Well, Mark Tinsley knew that Alec was covering about 60% of the personal injury cases in the county, so there was no way he was broke. And if he was, it was because he was obviously hiding money. So, Mark Tinsley filed a motion to compel Alec to produce his financial records. And that's when shit started to finally unravel. A hearing was scheduled for June 10th, 2021 to compel Alec to produce these financial records. And this was going to be catastrophic for Alec. By June of 2021, Alec had been stealing and scheming for longer than anybody knew. Well, I mean, anybody that wasn't in on it. He stole from his clients, he stole from his law firm, and even his own family. But then, on June 7th, 2021, 10:07 p.m., Alec Murdaugh called 911 to report that he had just gotten home and found his wife and son shot badly.
I need the police to answer immediately. My wife and child shot badly.
I mean, that's the understatement of the century. Just saying. So considering that we've all just spent the last 6 weeks following this trial that untangled this web of lies and confusion,
You know, oh, what a tangled web we weave.
I'm going to assume that you already know everything that happened there. So I'll actually link a couple of videos that cover this particular portion of the Alec Murdaugh story if you want to watch that. Basically, Maggie and Paul were both shot to death at the Moselle property while they were at the dog kennels. Alec got caught in some timeline lie. You know, he claimed he was never at the dog kennels, but he showed up in a video that was recorded within minutes of the murders. So anyway, he was eventually charged as a suspect, but not at first. Just a few days later, on June 10th, 2021, Alec's father, Handsome, Randolph Murdaugh III, died. The community was grieved. You know, there was a lot of sympathy for this barrage of tragedy that was befalling the Murdaugh family. And it canceled the hearing for the financial documents. I mean, was that why he killed Maggie and Paul? You know, did he just need the boat case to go away so that he could deal with the financial stuff? Or did he think that this would make it so now they don't need his financial documents? I don't know. Well, 15 days after the murders at Moselle, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, or SLED, announced that they were opening an investigation into the death of Stephen Smith based on information gathered during the course of the double murder investigation of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh. On September 3rd, Alec met with his brother Randy and another partner at PMPED, the family law firm. They were on to him, the financial stuff. They had uncovered a bunch of stuff that wasn't adding up and was, pretty much undeniable, and they forced him to resign. For the first time, Alec Murdaugh was facing consequences for his actions.
I don't want no consequence. I don't want no consequences chasing me right now.
It gets better. Well, or worse, I guess, depending on your point of view. The very next day, September 4th, 2021, at 1:34 in the afternoon, Alec Murdaugh called 911 again. He was on the side of the road near Varnville, and this time he said he had a flat tire, so he pulled over to fix it, and somebody in a truck stopped to help him, or rather Alex thought he was going to help him, but when he turned his back, the guy pulled a gun on him and shot him. The wound just grazed his head. It wasn't serious at all, but Alec was airlifted to Savannah to a hospital, and he was kept there for a couple of days. I mean, what is happening? On September 6th, 2 days later, Alec released a public statement saying that he had resigned from his family's law firm to enter rehab to treat his hardcore opiate addiction. So later in the murder trial, he testified that he started taking oxycodone or Oxycontin, whatever, oxy something, after some knee surgery he had like 16 years before that. And he had become addicted, and he had gone to detox twice in the past, but never rehab. Allegedly, Maggie or Paul would find pills and confront him, and, off he'd go to detox. I mean, there's also like maybe a connection to Gloria, like maybe she knew too much about this pill situation and Alec needed her to disappear. By the way, I find it very convenient that Alec Murdaugh's addiction was essentially unknown to everyone, yet he was able to function as an attorney and a part-time solicitor. I mean, this addiction was supposedly so intense that he was taking enough opioids to like take down an elephant.
You figure 100 pills would be 3,000 milligrams. 100.
I'm sorry, you would be deceased. Then, on September 14th, 2021, the police revealed that the roadside shooting, at least that's what they were calling it, was actually a setup by Alec. He confessed to police that he had asked his drug dealer and distant cousin, 61-year-old Curtis Edward Smith, to shoot him. And then Buster would be free of his bullshit and could inherit whatever was left of their estate and insurance policy and just live his life. Apparently, he thought that if he just killed himself, the insurance wouldn't pay out because of suicide, which was not the case. Also, he would have known that because he's an attorney. Anyways, that day, Cousin Eddie was arrested and charged with assisted suicide, assault, and battery of a high aggravated nature, firearms charges, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, all based on a drug addict's word. No witnesses, just some weird confession. I have questions. Cousin Eddie said that Alec called him and told him he had a flat tire. But when he got to the side of the road where Alec was, Alec had a gun and wanted Curtis to shoot him. And he was like, what the fuck are you talking? I'm not going to shoot you.
He said, yeah, you got to take care of this. I said, well, I can't do it. And he told me he turned his head. I just grabbed his arm, put it behind his head, took the gun from him. He
tried to wrestle the gun away from Alec and it went off, but he's confident that it hit nobody. It just went into the sky. So he left. He took the gun, chucked it out the window, and the reason he did that is because he knew Alec was fine, and he didn't want to call the law because Alec was the law. Now, this particular case is still waiting to be heard, so TBD. On September 16th, 2021, Alec was arrested and charged with the murders of Maggie and Paul. A local investigative journalist and the creator of the Murdaugh Murders podcast, Mandy Matney, was all over the story, and she was putting some major, feet to the fire. By the way, if you want to know more about the Murdaughs than you ever thought you could ever learn, listen to that podcast because it's incredible. So, considering the totality of the gruesome murders and the financial crimes and the roadside shooting shenanigans, Judge Clifton Newman denied bond for Alec, and he got real cozy in the Richland County Detention Center while he waited for trial. By the way, Judge Newman, doesn't he have like the sweetest little face? After Alec was arrested and denied bond in October of 2021, Buster, don't feel too bad for Buster. He was out living his best life, gambling in Las Vegas with Uncle John Marvin. Nice. Oh, and while we're talking about Buster, it seems like Bus was poised to follow in the Murdaugh tradition of becoming a lawyer. He was studying at the University of South Carolina, where else? But he was expelled for plagiarism. Gasp. Well, Alec tried to get that fixed by spending some $60,000 on a well-connected lawyer named Butch Bowers to get Buster reinstated, but that hasn't happened. He currently lives in Hilton Head Island with his girlfriend, Brooklyn. The trial of Alec Murdaugh began on January 25th, 2023 in the 14th Circuit of the South Carolina Circuit Court, the very courthouse that bore portraits of his own family members. The judge actually had to order to remove the portraits for the trial, and the trial went on for 6 weeks, but it took the jury 3 hours to return a verdict, and they actually made the decision in less than an hour.
Guilty, 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 guilty.
Those 99 financial crimes, still pending. And if I had to guess, I'd guess he's probably gonna plea. There is one question that I still have. Where's the money? Millions of dollars were stolen over the years, and yes, the Murdaughs lived a very affluent life, and yes, Alec Murdaugh was spending money on pills, but I'm squinting. I'll accept that Maggie had no idea what was going on with their finances, but there's also speculation that there might have been trouble in paradise. Some have reported that Alec and Maggie were pretty much separated, her living most of her time at Edisto and him at Moselle. She had maybe recently even consulted with a divorce attorney. I wouldn't be surprised if that was actually like an effort to shield assets. If they divorce and she takes all of the money in a divorce settlement before he gets busted in court, then the courts can't recover it. Then I don't know why he would have killed her, but who knows? There are still so many unanswered questions, but hopefully this brings you up to speed as much as possible. And that, for now, is the story of Alec Murdaugh. It's a lot. There's a lot of background, there's a lot of scandals, and that's only the stuff that we know. That's only the stuff that other people have already uncovered from like public records. If you're interested to know any of the makeup that I used, I will link everything that's available down in the description box. If it's not available, I'll find something similar. I'm definitely taking recommendations for Crue Trimes. We're digging through all the recommendations that you guys have sent. Thank you so much. We have some fun and terrible things planned. Thank you so much for hanging out today and for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this one, then consider subscribing to this channel before you leave today. I upload new videos here on YouTube every week, and you can follow me on all the other socials as well. That is it for now. I will catch you next time in the next video. Bye! Oh, this mirror, it says Glammy. They're not in business anymore. Sorry. South Korea. First four-way. Yeah, it was a four-way. Gross. Cousin Eddie. Wait, this way. This way you read left to right. Chad Westingdorf. Wait, Westingdorf. Did I say Murdaugh? It's Murdaugh. Murdaugh. From the railroad. Mags and Pawpaw had been talking to Ro-Ro, Stanky Leg, Little Jimmy, and Fathead, who had heard about pills from Handsome and Dibble Dabble, who told Bus and M, who threatened to call the Po-Po on the talkie-talkie.